Hi, I'm Dave.
And I'm Paul.
And we're going to challenge you to transform your financial future through the principles of the most profitable business in the world, banking.
We believe everyone should be involved in two businesses, the business that you're in and the banking business. Everyday people can replicate what bankers have been doing for centuries to leverage capital and build wealth through private lending.
Join us as we uncover the truths about money, expose lies and myths, and flip conventional financial advice on its head. Here we go. All right, Paul. Welcome back, buddy.
How you doing?
I'm good. It's 1 degree outside. You can't even say degrees. It's singular. 1 degree. I went for a walk today because it was sunny. So The only time we get the sunshine in Minnesota in the wintertime is when it's very, very cold. So I went for a walk and I actually got pretty warm by the end of it, except I couldn't feel my fingers. And I was trying to press buttons on my phone and I couldn't feel anything. So I just put the phone away.
Oh, That sounds awful.
Yeah, it is what it is. You know, I think February is the darkest month of the year, like emotionally in Minnesota.
Yeah.
Because you've been in winter for so long and you're like, another month. And then March starts. There's a little light at the end of the tunnel there. So definitely looking forward to March.
Yeah, it was 60 degrees here today. And then Saturday, I washed my car.
Yeah. I washed my car quite a bit. I've got a membership, and I just drive through and they dry it off. And I get home and I got to bang against the door to unfreeze it and break it open. Yeah.
Is it touchless or does it have like the brushes and stuff?
It's got the brushes.
Oh man, that screws up your clear coat.
Yeah. I mean, I drive a truck.
I mean, Dave doesn't care. We know. Yeah. He's going to run that thing into the ground.
That's why I got a gray truck. It's a good color because
it is a good color.
They don't look. It's nice when it's clean and it doesn't show dirt near as well as most colors do.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. But all right. Hey, before we forget, let's remind everybody, you need to pause this podcast and go to the show notes and register for the live Q&A on February 16th at 7 p.m. So just pause right now, go do that, come back. Unless you're driving, wait till you come to a stop.
Right. And that's 7 p.m. Central Standard Time, United States.
Central. We should start talking in Zulu time, maybe. Everybody get your Zulu watches out. I think we should operate on Zulu. Then it would be the exact same time everywhere in the world, and nobody would have any confusion.
Like, what time is it? And even Afghanistan.
Which is a half hour off. Like, who has a time zone that's a half hour off?
I remember I got there, I was like, what time is it? I was like, how does that work?
How is that possible? Yeah.
And then a rocket came in.
Oh, yeah. Yep. That'll wake you up.
So funny.
Yeah. So go register for that. That'll be, we'll probably just make this one an introduction, do a little intro on us, unless you're tired of hearing about us, and then we'll maybe just throw it open to Q&A. And then after that, I think we'll plan a specific topic every month, maybe. And could even have at some point have a guest. Like, we've never had a guest on this podcast. Hey, actually, guess what? Guess what podcast number this is?
52.
52. 1 year.
1 year.
Wow. We did 1 full year without a break. Not every Monday. I think one came out on Tuesday because we were late getting it into the producer. But yeah. So
very, very, very. It's a good milestone. It's a great milestone, and
feels good.
Yeah, it does. I still remember clicking record back when I was doing the recording in the early days, and how nervous I was. Like, oh my God, the red light.
Yeah, the red light. And, oh man, maybe we should edit that out. Oh, we should back that up. No, whatever. It is.
Yeah. Let it roll.
Let it roll. Whatever we say is what you get.
What do we got today?
So we were talking before this, and I think one thing we haven't really covered, and we don't want to cover it in depth necessarily because that'd be too long of an episode, but we should talk a little bit about inflation and fractional reserve banking. I think we take it for granted that people actually understand the banking system we have in this country and likely every country in the world.
In the world, yeah.
Right? Because there's no country that's on the gold standard. There's no country that operates by sound money anymore. Right?
Yes, you're right. There's been some chatter, I think, lately of countries at least talking about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Countries that we may not agree with either. But anyway,
but yeah,
it would be good. Sound money would be better. Anyway.
Yeah, and sound money is simply money that's backed by something of value, like a tangible value. Like, what is our money backed by right now?
The Bretton Woods Agreement in 1944.
Yeah, it's backed by the good faith
and credit of the United States government, whatever that
exactly.
is.
Faith and credit of the United States government.
That's $31 trillion in debt, and even more so when you consider unfunded liabilities like Medicare and Social Security. So anyway, yes.
Yeah.
Sound money would be better.
Yeah. So what we operate under, like every country in the world, is what we term fiat currency. And fiat currency just means that, like this right here, here's a $20 bill. This has $20 worth of purchasing power because the government said it does. That is fiat currency. And you have to use that to transact. Like, essentially, they say, I mean, it says on here, this is good for all debts, public and private.
Yep. Legal tender for all debts, public and private.
Yep, exactly. And
right?
It says, yep, at the very top, it says Federal Reserve Note. So maybe let's hit on what is the Federal Reserve.
Yeah, I took a picture in front of the Washington D.C. branch during the summer and sent it to James.
Oh, yeah.
And he's like, you should go in there and demand payment in specie.
Yeah.
Okay. So what is the Federal Reserve Bank? So everyone pull out their dollar and you can look at the top of it. A lot of people don't realize that. It says Federal Reserve Note until they actually look at it, because no one ever looks at a dollar. Maybe you look at it when you're a kid or something. But the Federal Reserve System was instituted by our government in, the monetary scientists, the political scientists. They had this meeting in Jekyll Island off the coast of Georgia in 1910-ish with some high-level politicians. Senator Nate, what was his? Aldrich was one of the guys.
Yeah, and bankers.
There were some bankers from the Rockefeller people and the J.P. Morgan people, and sprinkling in some influence from the Rothschilds with Paul Warburg and all these other people.
Which Paul Warburg is who the character Daddy Warbucks was based off in Little Orphan Annie.
That's right. Anyway, and I might have got who they worked for somewhat incorrect, but I'm pretty sure I'm fairly correct on those. Anyway, so the Federal Reserve Act was passed in 1913. It created the Federal Reserve System. And before that, you had independent banks, and you could choose what bank you wanted to work with, which you still can, but maybe this bank was really conservative and you liked that. They didn't make risky loans, so there was competition in the marketplace. Now all the banks that we all use belong to the Federal Reserve System. So if you wire a large amount of money, Dave, it says the Federal Reserve has just received your wire, right? In his processing or whatever. But the Federal Reserve banking system, the Federal Reserve, it's not a bank, it's not federal, and it has no reserve.
Exactly. Which people don't understand that. Why did they choose the name Federal Reserve Bank? Because they're just pulling the wool over the American citizens' eyes, like politicians do and banks do throughout history, and they always will. They use different words to make you think something that it's actually that it's not, like the Inflation Reduction Act. Are you kidding me? How do you reduce inflation by printing more money? It's nonsensical. Yeah.
It's the opposite. So I think it would be helpful, Dave, if we have a discussion of, we can get into if you're looking for a great book to read on that, it's either you get the Eustace Mullins book, Secrets of the Federal Reserve, or The Creature from Jekyll Island. But if you want a more condensed, actually End the Fed by Ron Paul is a good little book as well.
Right. There's The Case Against the Fed.
The Case Against the Fed.
By Murray Rothbard.
Yep. Murray Rothbard's great. There's also this book, How Privatized Banking Really Works, written by Carlos Lara and Dr. Robert Murphy, who are both on the Nelson Nash Institute Board of Trustees. Phenomenal book one of the first books I read. It might have been the third book that touched IBC that I read, but it's a 3-part book that goes into kind of the history of money, fractional reserve banking, which we're going to talk about today, and kind of the solution to getting back to sound money, and how that's a solution to our problems.
Right. And those authors, Carlos and Bob also, Bob Murphy also wrote The Case for IBC.
Yes.
And that also has a little bit of that history, I believe, you know, it talks about fractionalized lending and all that.
That
But
book too.
Bob Murphy, I would like him to be our first guest. I really think we should reach out to Bob and see, and maybe we'll talk to him next month at the IBC think tank and see if he can get on our podcast, because talking to him about fractional reserve banking would be amazing. So I'll give you guys a really good in-depth, you know, discussion on the economy.
It'll go longer than 27 minutes though.
For sure. Yeah. If he gives us that much time, that'd be fine.
As long as it'd be great if he could give us like an hour, you know?
Yeah. And the great thing about him, he's a PhD Austrian economist, but he's funny. He's got a very dry wit, and he weaves humor into what he's saying. And he's just a really brilliant guy that I love listening to. He's got his own podcast, The Bob Murphy Show, and then the Laura Murphy Report, if you guys want any in-depth economic analysis.
Yep. And I think he used to have another one called Contra Krugman or Counter Krugman or something, where he would like kind of troll Paul Krugman, you know, the New York Times or whatever.
Yeah.
You know,
Paul Krugman's such an idiot. I love it when he says something like, I follow a bunch of people on LinkedIn, and they always, you know, somebody's always blasting Paul Krugman, like Jim Cramer, right? It's like the Cramer index. Just do the opposite. Right. And that's the actual answer. Right? That's the right thing to do. So, yeah. And the cool thing about Bob and Carlos is they're not insurance guys. They're not licensed insurance salesmen. So they don't, or agents, they don't sell insurance to anybody, but they are on the board of the Nelson Nash Institute, and they really, they educate us. They educate, and they're huge proponents of infinite banking.
Yep.
And everything that Nelson taught. So,
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. So let's get back to, we're kind of skipping all over the place, but, let's focus a little bit on fractional banking, fractional reserve banking. Real quick, just a little bit about the history of banking. So it used to be people maybe would carry precious metals like gold and silver, and they would transact in that.
In their purse,
right? And then, you know, the difficult part about that is you can only break those down so much, right? And they're not, what do they call, fungible, or they weren't necessarily homogenous. So you couldn't say, hey, you know, give me $2.32, whatever, in gold. Or it was just very difficult.
Right.
And it was heavy. It was cumbersome. They don't want to
carry around.
And very risky to be storing all of your wealth in your house where a thief can come in and take it. Right. So they would actually people would take their precious metals to a warehouse where somebody would lock all of those precious metals up, and then give them a receipt saying, here's how much you have.
That's right.
Right.
It was goldsmiths.
That's who it was. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because they were able to protect it, and they were responsible for protecting it. And you would pay them a fee to hold your money, and then you would just carry the receipts. And so people ended up starting to transact with these receipts, because those receipts were legitimate claim to gold. So I could give you a receipt for, you know, 10 ounces of gold in return for, you know, the horses I wanted to buy from you.
Yep.
And you could take that receipt, go to the bank, and redeem that gold. But what it ended up happening more often than not is you would probably just take that receipt and go exchange that for something that you needed.
That's right.
Right. And that receipt would just pass around and around and around. And so how often did the people actually go retrieve their gold from the bank, from the goldsmith?
Well, the idea behind it was, not everyone's going to go redeem their receipts at the same time, right? And that's still the idea today.
Right. And goldsmiths caught wind of this after a little while of doing this, and they're like, got all this gold. They're not all going to come get it at once. So what does that become? A huge, giant temptation for somebody who's not, few people are immune to that kind of temptation, right? It's just human nature. Unfortunately. So what would these goldsmiths then do?
So they would they thought.
You got a visitor back there.
Got a visitor. Thanks. Blew my train of thought too. Hey,
So
so
the
the
goldsmith, yeah, go ahead.
discovered, hey, not everyone's going to come get these receipts at the same time, right? I can now lend out what people have on deposit here to other people, and I'll give them receipts for those things. I'll put these things out on loan and make money, right? And that was kind of the birth of fractional reserve banking.
So in essence, let's say they had 100 pounds of gold, and they had 100 pounds of gold receipts out to those rightful owners of that gold. But they knew all those owners weren't going to come get that at the same time. So now they started loaning out more receipts. So now the 100 pounds of gold actually has more than 100 pounds of receipts, which is the definition of what? I mean, what are they essentially doing?
Well, they're counterfeiting.
Yeah, yeah. I guess the word I was looking for was they're inflating. But you're right, they're counterfeiting.
It's counterfeiting,
which is funny you say that, because kind of sounds like exactly what the Federal Reserve does today, essentially counterfeiting.
Dave, that's exactly what they do today, except what a lot of people don't realize, folks, is that it's not, and I'm holding up a $5 bill here in front of the camera for those watching on YouTube, but they're doing it digitally. You don't even know it's happening. So whenever you hear the word stimulus, or the Federal Reserve is, increasing, its balance sheet by, buying bonds, right, from the U.S. Treasury, it's a shell game, Dave, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean it's truly the definition of inflation, right? Which is inflating the money supply.
That's right. And what does that do, right? It makes the money that's otherwise out there in the economy less valuable. So now it takes more of this $5 bill. Maybe it takes 2 of them now to buy a dozen eggs, or 18 eggs.
Well, it certainly takes one of them today to buy a dozen eggs. I know that for a fact.
I know.
Little chickens running through the neighborhood wearing, carrying Gucci purses right now, right, and wearing Jimmy Choo shoes.
It's ridiculous. And that's kind of this mystery of, the U.S. We hear the U.S. dollar has lost, X amount of value since the Federal Reserve Act was
95%. I think
95%. I think as of 2010, roughly.
Yeah.
Even more so now, because we've printed so much money even in the last 24 months. It's been ridiculous. We did it during the COVID crap in 2020, where we printed a bunch of money and then paid a bunch of people to stay at home and not go to work. And then we had another round of that. And it's just, when you look at what the debt was under George W. Bush, right? It was, I think it was in the single digit trillions, which is still awful, right?
Yeah.
And now we're at 31 trillion,
right?
I think,
yeah. No president's going to stop that, and no Congress certainly is going to stop that, because it's a free ride for them. It's a heyday. So let's talk about inflation for a second. So people seem to complicate inflation a lot more than they need to. It's really not a difficult. It's not a difficult thing to understand, folks.
Tell that story.
Okay, so I probably told this story almost a year ago in one of the early episodes, but here's a quick little story about how some 10-year-olds discovered inflation on their own. So next to my house, we got a wooded area, right? There are a lot of kids in the neighborhood. So a few summers ago, this is probably 2-3 summers ago, about 10 kids in the neighborhood were all out there building forts. They pick up sticks and build some stick forts, and they started selling them to each other. And they started using, because none of them had actual money, right? None of the parents around here give their kids money, so it's pretty awesome. So they had
people.
Yeah, my kind of people. So they had to create their own currency. So what do? They found walnuts. There are a lot of walnut trees around. So they would go pick up walnuts off the ground, put them in a bag, and then they would go buy these forts from each other. And the first day, it cost 10 walnuts to buy a fort. 2 days later, what do you think most of the kids do? What do they spend their time doing?
Picking up walnuts.
Collecting walnuts, right? And they all recognize this. And now they're all charging 100 walnuts per fort just a couple days later. Until it becomes so outrageously ridiculous. Everybody's got so many walnuts, and the price of these homes are so much that they just stop building them because it doesn't make any sense. They're not going to make any money off of it. And then they actually just kind of quit playing that game altogether and ended up going to do something else because they realized their walnuts have no value anymore.
That's right.
So that, folks, is inflation. They inflated the currency supply of walnuts, which drove up the cost of everything. That's what we're seeing today. Is more money printed. Your dollars are worth less right now. Therefore, everything costs more of them.
And it's funny, Dave, when I listen to these, again, I'm in the gym and there's Bloomberg on there and all these talking heads talking about, and I'm sure they have degrees in finance and economics and all this other crap from whatever schools, Ivy League schools they went to, probably Dartmouth. And they're always talking about, the Fed, the Chairman Powell is going to fight inflation, and the Fed's going to be fighting inflation. And, you hear the politicians talking about it. So they either don't know what it is, or I don't understand.
Or they're intentionally trying to deceive you and confuse you.
Well, of course, that's what they're doing, right?
Right.
That's what they're doing. But it just amazes me. I'm like, there's no way. There's got to be more. There's probably more people than we think out there that know what's going on. Right? I remember my father talking about the Fed back in the 80s. Yeah, it's not federal. It has no reserve. I remember him saying that all the time. And of course, I didn't understand what the hell he was talking about. But
yeah, you didn't care.
No, I didn't care. I was like,
here's the thing about politicians. And I've never worked with him directly, so I'm hearing this secondhand. But I work with a guy who his neighbor is a chief of staff for some local, senators.
State level?
State level congressman.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, sure.
And he said, these politicians, if you want to know the truth, they're C students with A egos. Like, these are not smart people. Let's be honest. When you have one politician saying, hey, this latest big omnibus bill that passed, don't worry, it won't cause inflation because most of those dollars are going overseas anyway. They won't even be in our country. Like these are the kind of people that we elect, folks. It's sad.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
I believe that. Because there's not one legitimate question that ever gets asked. And maybe they're afraid of getting assassinated or something, but there's just, listen, the cause of the problem is the system that we have. The system that we have is not going to be the solution to that problem, Dave, is it?
No, even though they pose themselves, they create the problems and then they create the solution to their own problems so they can be hailed as a hero by all of us.
Right. I mean, you're looking for real estate right now to buy a single family home for your new family. And,
right.
And, I'm looking as well. And the damage has been done. The cost of real estate is infinitely more expensive than it was just a couple of years ago. It's really, I've lived in many different parts of the country and I've looked back there and say, oh my God, I can't believe a house that went for $159 in when did I buy that house? 2018 or whatever, that, is now $275.
Well, I moved here 8.5 years ago and I bought a house for $289. Yeah. And I thought, and that was a stretch I wanted to stay under 300.
Yep.
Now, 300, you're getting a shack. You're getting nothing for $300K around here anymore. That was only 8.5 years ago. Now to get an equivalent house, you're talking at least 600.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep. And everyone was fawning on how, strong the housing market was, and it's just crazy, and I wonder, do these people know why? Do they understand why that is happening? And I don't think they do, because a lot of them got caught holding the bag after interest rates jumped up a little bit, and looks like we overbuilt. Yep, you did.
Yep. So that's inflation. Let's go back to fractionalized reserve banking. How does that work? So I think most people know you deposit. Let's use what's the example? You deposit $10,000 into your bank account.
Sure.
Right? Does bank have your $10,000 there?
Like in cash?
Yeah.
No.
Are they holding it? No, of course
No.
not. So what are they required? I mean, traditionally, historically, they've been required to hold about 10% in reserve. It's gone all the way down to like 0% before,
Yeah. Now it
right?
varies, but it's generally 10%. Yeah.
Yeah. So let's just say, let's be gracious and say the bank holds on to 10% of every deposit they receive.
Sure.
What are they doing with the other 90%?
They're lending it out.
They're lending it out. So let's say, Paul, you come to me, you deposit 10 grand in my bank. I'm going to hold $1,000
Yep.
because I have to, because the Fed says I have to.
Yep.
And I'm going to take $9,000 of yours. Actually, it's not yours anymore. You gave it to me. You're just an unsecured creditor.
That's correct.
I have possession of your money. So
Thanks,
I'm going to
Todd
take,
Frank.
I'm going to take my $9,000 now, and I'm going to loan it to Bill over here. And Bill's going to take that and deposit it into his bank. Then what's going to happen from there?
That's going to get lent out. They'll keep 10% of that on reserve, and they'll lend out the other 90%.
So they keep $900 on reserve, and they'll loan out $8,100 to Jane. Jane goes deposited in her bank. They keep $810, and it goes on and on and on, right? After just 2 transactions, you give the money to me, I give the money to somebody else. It's gone through 3 banks. We've already inflated the money supply by, it's up to like $17,000 from that original $10,000 you put in.
Yeah.
And it goes on and on and on to the point where your $10,000 is going to actually create $100,000 of new monies being circulated throughout the country or the world.
Money.
Magic money. That right there is fractional reserve banking. They only have to keep a fraction back, and the rest they can use to create more money out of thin air.
Right. And folks, do you see how that is how the currency gets devalued? That is why, despite making more and more money every year, you don't feel any wealthier.
Right.
That is why.
I probably made 3 to 4 times as much in the last year than I did, say, 10 years ago. But I didn't feel any wealthier than I did 10 years ago.
Right.
I just didn't.
No, because everything is, we went to the Washington, D.C. auto show where they display all the new cars and stuff. And it's a traveling show. It goes around all the, major cities. And I remember going to it as a child in Boston. But there was a Jeep, 4-door Jeep. It was nice. It was the Rubicon or whatever. Guess how much that thing was, Dave?
Oh, I like the Rubicon. 4-door Rubicon. What? 70? 80? Wow.
It was 80. Yeah, it was like 80 grand.
Wow. Yeah, that's.
And I'm like, I like Jeeps. They're cool. I've never owned one, but they're cool. But there's not much to them. The doors are light as a feather. Pretty thin stamped sheet metal or whatever. But my goodness gracious.
Yeah.
And then your truck. Actually, it was a Bighorn. It wasn't like you have leather in yours. You have a Laramie, I think.
Yeah.
Your truck, 1/2-ton, 5.7 Hemi, was 68, I think.
Wow.
That's with cloth seats, heated cloth seats. So as comparison, folks, so that's a 1/2-ton pickup. Pretty nice, right? Minus the leather. It didn't have leather, but nice. My 3/4-ton pickup in 2016 which is a Laramie Sport Edition, whatever, was less than that by a lot.
Yeah. Crazy, man. Everybody's feeling the pain, you know? And what can we do on an individual level? Well, this is one reason I choose to keep my money in life insurance companies as opposed to the bank. I put my money in policies, right? That's what we do. Because then the banker can't go lend my money out 9 times. I get to reap the rewards.
That's right. Yep. There's, again, I'll go back to Carlos and Bob's book here that kind of outlines how we can get after it. And they call it building the 10%. The idea is, if we can get 10% of the population to just ceasing to use the fractional reserve, Federal Reserve system, this cartelized banking system that we all are really slaves under, quite honestly. You don't have a choice. You have to participate in it, right? There's no other way. But they go through that book very, very, very well, and how you could, as a citizenry, how we could actually overcome it, right? And of course, ending the Federal Reserve System has to be done, right?
Yeah, that's gonna take a war, because they're pretty powerful. They're not going to go quietly into the night,
right? Or tie the dollar back to gold. That's the other part of it.
Yeah,
tie it back to something of tangible value that's limited in quantity. That's
sound money.
Yep.
Now, people would say Bitcoin is that because it's limited in quantity. So we're not going to do an episode on Bitcoin ever, because neither of us are that versed on it.
That stuff's not my jam. We're not your dudes for that. That's for sure.
Yeah.
I find it all mildly interesting, to be honest with you.
Yeah, mildly interesting. And, if it turns out to be the way things are, then I guess we adapt to it.
Yep.
But yeah, go back. If anybody's looking for a good book to read, this is it's actually a really easy read, about 370 pages. But How Privatized Banking Really Works. Subtitle: Integrating Austrian Economics with the Infinite Banking Concept. So that's great. Definitely recommend that one.
Yep.
And then The Creature from Jekyll Island, if you want to learn about the Federal Reserve System and the history of money, and the real reason why a lot of wars have been fought in the last couple hundred years. It's a very big book. That's why I got it on Audible. I listened to it.
Yeah, this one's great book. 600, 580 pages, give or take.
Yeah.
Phenomenal. I always tell people, it's a terrible story told very well.
Yep. Yeah. You're not going to get a warm, fuzzy feeling after reading that one. You're not going to be happy. Let's just say that, but your eyes are going to be opened.
Dave, I had several of my friends read that over the last couple of years.
Yeah.
And they'd be texting me like, dude, oh my God.
Yeah. So, it's certainly eye-opening.
But Dave, knowing what's going on the individual level, when you know what's going on, you'll know what to do.
Exactly.
And so when I see people talking about dividend paying whole life, and they can spell IBC, and they're, you could do this, you could do that. They're missing 90% of the why. I think, a lot of the why is in these books over here, of why this is on the individual you and me level is the thing to do, is the path. It is the way.
Right. Yeah. A lot of people choose to bury their head in the sand. They don't even want to think about it. It's too scary. Right. They don't really want to know the truth. I think anybody listening to this podcast is definitely open to hearing the truth and searching for it. And those are a couple of good book recommendations for uncovering the truth that's been hidden pretty well from all of us.
No question. That's why they chose the name Federal Reserve System. It sounds governmenty, doesn't it?
Other than centralized banking cartel.
Right. It sounds a lot better than,
Yeah, sounds a lot better. It's more palatable for the citizenry, for the sheep, right? Yeah.
Yep. And as we get more and more ignorant we're over 100 years removed from 1913, right? So it becomes, there's less and less people that know. So I that's why I harp on it, man. Every time I can, if someone's looking for a new read, I'm like, go read that book if you can find a copy of it.
Yeah. And trust me, the Federal Reserve, you're like, what a bunch of idiots. They're far from being idiots. They know exactly what they're doing.
It's cunning. And there's, and not to be, a conspiracy theorist, but, there's a lot going on behind the scenes when you look at like the World Economic Forum, for example, that just occurred in Davos, where all these environmentalists, right, and all these elites, flying their private jets to save, global, the environment, of course.
Yeah.
But, there's something afoot, and there has been for a long time, Dave. And and you got to think, what has kind of screwed over people, just regular old human beings throughout human history? Governments.
Yep. And yet we are quick to forget and quick to forgive and go back to them for the answers.
Yep.
Which is, unfortunate. So maybe read 1984 as well.
Oh,
while you're at it.
I read that for the first time last year.
Me too. Last year was the first time
I had never read those.
That should be mandatory reading for high school kids. Mandatory.
Instead they're reading like Pool Boy and other whatever. Anyway.
Yeah.
Loudoun County, Virginia. That was a Loudoun County, Virginia joke.
Yeah. Well, you're not the only one. Same where I live. All right, man. Well, hey, that was good. Everybody go register. If you didn't do it at the beginning, maybe you're done driving by now because we went a little longer than the average commute. So now you should be at work or at home. You can go to the show notes, register for the live Q&A February 16th, 7 p.m. Central. And would love to see you there and answer any questions you guys have. So, well,
Looking forward to it.
yeah. All right, Paul. Until next time, control your capital.
Or someone else will.
Hey, thanks for listening, everybody. If you'd like to have a conversation with us to see how you can become your own banker, or if you have any questions or topics you'd like us to tackle on a future episode, please send us an email to davidandpaul@theibcguys.com.
And subscribe and leave us a review if you're on Apple. Follow and leave us a 5-star review if you're on Spotify. And please share this with your friends. We'll see you next week.